Welcome back to Empathy Here, Not There, the podcast where we explore empathy in all its forms. I am your host, Curtis Campogni, and today we are diving deep into the world of superhero movies. Now, we are used to seeing superheroes save the day and villains causing chaos. But beneath the surface, many of these characters are driven by empathy or the lack of it. This is why I created the book Cape Conversations, and many of my workshops have that superhero theme. So why not, for Empathy Here, Not There, we do empathy in superhero movies, heroes, villains, and moral dilemmas. See, superhero movies might be filled with action, but at their core, they explore the human experience and how we connect to others. So today, let's break down how empathy plays a major role in shaping those heroes, those villains, and even take a closer look at movies like The Joker that challenges us to empathize with someone we know is making morally questionable choices. Stick with me because we have a lot to unpack with this one. So let's start by looking at the heroes. Superheroes like Spider-Man, Batman, Wonder Woman, are more than just their powers. They are defined by their empathy. Peter Parker, for instance, is Spider-Man because he understands the struggles of ordinary people, having been one himself. So his empathy for New Yorkers is what drives him to risk everything to protect them. His journey as Spider-Man is also rooted in loss. Obviously, the death of his uncle teaches him that with great power comes, you know it, great responsibility. A responsibility not just to himself, but to others. This sense of responsibility comes from deep empathy for those around him, especially those who are vulnerable. Think about how Peter Parker constantly makes sacrifices to protect others, and a lot of our heroes do. You see, that's a common theme. Peter Parker gives up his own personal desires, his relationships, his safety, his future, because he knows what it feels like to lose someone important. He doesn't want anyone else to experience that pain. This empathy is what makes him a true hero, not just for his powers. This is very closely aligned to emotional empathy, which, if you have not listened to that episode where we talk about the difference between emotional empathy, cognitive empathy, and compassion, I encourage you to do that. So let's switch gears. Let's talk about the villains, because you can't have a superhero story without a villain, right? Superhero movies often do something really interesting. They, at least good ones do. They give us a window into the villain's motivations. They make us empathize with characters who, on the surface, are causing harm. Take Killmonger in Black Panther. His actions are violent, but they're rooted in deep personal historical trauma. He's fighting for liberation. He's fighting for justice, and not just for himself, but also for oppressed people. So the brilliance of the Black Panther movie is how it makes us empathize with Killmonger's pain. While we might not agree with his methods and we find ourselves rooting for the hero, we understand where he's coming from. And that's the power of empathy. It allows us to see beyond someone's actions to understand that hurt that drives them. And then there's one of my favorite, Thanos, probably my favorite superhero movie out there, Avengers Infinity War. His goal was wiping out half the universe. It's horrifying, right? But the film gives us enough insight into his thinking to understand why he believes his actions are necessary. Thanos is trying to prevent what happened to his planet, the overpopulation, the extinction, from happening on a universal scale. The empathy we feel for Thanos, it doesn't excuse his actions. Just like the empathy you might feel for a coworker or a neighbor or a family member, that doesn't mean you justify their actions, but it makes it more complex. There's more nuance. It's a more layered character. So we're forced to reflect on the moral dilemma that he poses. Another fascinating aspect of superhero movies is how the heroes show empathy for one another. In Avengers, for example, Iron Man and Captain America are constantly at odds, right? There's always an issue. Tony Stark is all about technology and making logical decisions, while Steve Rogers is driven by his principles and his moral compass. These two tend to clash in a big way, especially in Captain America Civil War, when they finally go at it. But over time, they learn to understand and empathize with each other's perspectives. And this teaches us that even when we disagree with someone, finding common ground and empathizing with their values can lead to stronger partnerships. It can lead to true collaboration and more positive change, more positive outcomes. And that's why I think I've mentioned it in almost every podcast. Empathy truly is a superpower. And some superheroes actually have empathy as their superpower. If you think of Professor X from X-Men, right? His telepathic abilities allow him to feel and understand others. He feels their emotions. He hears their thoughts. He's able to see their motivations. And then there's heroes like Wonder Woman. Empathy is still one of her greatest strengths. I think it was Wonder Woman 1984. The climax of the film isn't about physical combat. It's about using her empathy to connect with both the villain and humanity at large. She convinces people to give up their selfish desires for the greater good. Her ability to understand and feel others' pain is what ultimately saves the world. Yes, empathy can save the world, not just in the movies. Let's talk about one of my favorite deep dives into empathy as it relates to the villains, and that is from the movie Joker. This movie is so unique because it forces the audience into a position where we empathize with a character who commits immoral, horrifying acts. The transformation into the Joker is fueled by mental illness, isolation, systematic failures, societal barriers that are imposed on him, and it largely just went ignored, right? He was just by himself having to navigate this. And what's fascinating about the Joker is that it uses empathy to make us uncomfortable. We see his struggles. We see his deep loneliness and the ways in which society mistreats him. We don't condone his actions, but we begin to understand how someone could fall into that darkness. That kind of empathy doesn't excuse wrongdoing, but it challenges us to think about the societal and personal factors that contribute to it. So, what can we take away from all of this? What can we take away from these superhero stories when it comes to empathy in our own lives? Here are some practical strategies we can use to develop empathy as our superpower so that you too can inspire, change, have a positive impact. One of the first, most basic ones is listen before acting. Wonder Woman often listens before leaping into action. In our own lives, we can start by really listening to people's concerns before reacting. Empathy begins with understanding, and that requires us to pause and pay attention. In other words, you have to think beyond your initial reaction. You're going to have an initial emotional reaction to a lot of topics. Can you stop, pause, and keep listening as opposed to reacting? Another thing, obviously, with empathy is trying to step into someone else's shoes. Spider-Man constantly sacrifices his own desires to help others. Take a moment to step into someone else's shoes. Prioritize someone else's needs above your own, especially if they're going through something that's unfamiliar to you or new to you or something you haven't experienced. This can help you connect with their emotions and support them more effectively. That's when you're establishing that emotional empathy. Empathy for difficult people is another thing. That's kind of going back to Black Panther, how it encourages us to empathize with Killmonger. We can learn to empathize with people we might not get along with. Understand that difficult behaviors often, almost always, have roots in deeper pain and frustration. All behavior is a symptom of what we think, what we feel, and our experiences. And if you can see that nuance in a situation, it might be a little easier to empathize with difficult people or difficult situations. You can also, obviously, when talking about the Avengers, empathy can build strong teams. When you understand each other's perspectives, you have more grace for each other. In your personal or your professional life, use empathy to strengthen relationships and build collaboration. Acknowledge people's challenges. Work toward shared goals. And then finally, empathy, I think I've already said a couple times, it is a superpower for change. Empathy can create real change. Real long-term sustainable change cannot work without a foundation of empathy if you're talking about people, just like it does in Wonder Woman 1984. Whether it's standing up for someone being mistreated or offering a kind word, empathy has the power to make a difference in your community, in your household, in your workplace, wherever you go. So yeah, I like this topic. Superhero movies, yes, they remind us that empathy is not just for the good guys. It is the key to understanding everyone's story, whether it is the hero or the villain. So next time you watch a superhero movie, I want to give you a challenge. Ask yourself, what's the empathy lesson here? How can I bring that into my own life? So yeah, I like this episode. Thank you for tuning in. This was Empathy Here, Not There. Be sure to subscribe for more episodes, and I will catch you next time as we explore empathy in all its forms. Go be a hero. I'll see y'all soon. Peace.